Welcome to the Missionary Mobilization Podcast, a resource for Christian leaders who want to increase the number of missionaries around the world. This podcast is a ministry of the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School. Visit us online at missionarymobilization.org. Now, here's your host, the founder and director of the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention, David Jacob.
Well, thanks, Tim, and welcome everyone to the Missionary Mobilization Podcast. Our goal is to equip and encourage mobilizers and missions pastors from around the world. Please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app. And if you would give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, that would help us to reach more listeners. Perhaps you've got a friend that you think might enjoy this particular episode. We'd love it if you would recommend it to them. And if you've got any suggestions for show topics, please email us at hello@missionarymobilization.org. We love hearing from you, our listeners, and we hear from you often. Well, did you know that the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention also publishes the Missionary Mobilization Journal? So for those of you who love to read, this is published semi-annually, and this journal produces practical and theoretical articles related to missions mobilization within the context of the missionary, church, agency, and academy to equip and educate these stakeholders in the ministry of missionary mobilization. Our latest issue on the role of diversity in mobilization was just published last month, and this journal is available free of charge in digital format. You can download it online at missionarymobilization.org/journal. Our topic today is navigating closed doors in mobilization, and our guest is Carol Ghattas. Carol is a Tennessee native with an MDiv from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, where she met her late husband, Dr. Raouf Ghattas. Carol has served for over 20 years in overseas missions, the majority of that time in the Middle East and North Africa. After their return from the field in 2009, Raouf and Carol established the Arabic Baptist Church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Carol is an author of 6 books, fiction and nonfiction. She's a popular speaker and a full-time public librarian. A contract writer for Mission Mosaic magazine, Carol also maintains an active blog site entitled lifeinexile.net. She has 2 grown sons and 2 beautiful daughters-in-law. Carol, welcome to the program today.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you.
Well, talk to us a little bit about your motivation for writing this book. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, I'm holding it up now. It's called When Doors Close. And talk to us a little bit about what motivated you to write this book.
Well, after 20 years in mission service and active in cross-cultural work in the States and beyond, I know a little bit about closed doors. I've had quite a few closed along the way. And after I started thinking about what is my next step in writing, what do I want to do, what is the Lord asking of me, I really felt like I wanted to pour into the next generation of mission workers. And so this was a work that I felt like could help them navigate some of those doors that might close in their own service.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, as you know, our audience is made up of several different types of Christian leaders, but mainly mission mobilizers, missions pastors, perhaps missionaries who want to mobilize the next generation of missionaries like yourself. But why would someone who is feeling called to missions or someone that is helping to send more to the field, why would they want to read a book about closed doors? I mean, wouldn't that maybe stop them from taking that next step into service?
Maybe. It is a potential, roadblock to service to say that there might be a door closed, but I also feel like it is a way to kind of pull off the rose-colored glasses. Jesus, says that you want to build a tower, you need to count the cost. And so anytime that we walk into service with the Lord, we need to see what's going to happen. It's not always going to be easy, and He never promised it would be easy. So I do believe that it's a way to be prepared. It helps those that are preparing missionaries to see potential roadblocks and to help those that are going into service to better face those, but also just the missionary themselves to say, okay, these are some things I need to be thinking about before I go, or while I'm on the field. If I'm facing something right now, what can I do to navigate this better and to find some encouragement?
I agree. I think it's really important, especially for the younger generation, for millennials, for those of Gen Z. We need to talk about the difficulties of the mission field. Like you mentioned, we don't want to just look at this through rose-colored glasses, and we need to talk about missions mistakes in the past. As the Barna, as you're probably familiar, came out with a study on the future of missions, and one of the things that they noted, we'll link to this text in our show notes, but one of the things they noted was that we need to talk about the history of missions, our mistakes, and some of these difficulties. Even if we don't have the answers, it's important to talk about these subjects. So I've read your book. I think it's really important. I've recommended it for one of our professors who teaches in preparing to live interculturally, that course for our students. And so it is important. And again, as we who work with potential missionaries know, not everyone should be going to the field, but God does have a role for everyone in the missions endeavor. Sometimes it's overseas. Sometimes it's like you and I, where it's here in the States, right?
Right.
So is this a book just for people getting ready to serve, or do you have other audiences in mind here?
Well, I do have other audiences. I do believe that it is helpful if you think about 2020. We all know what happened in 2020, and so many cross-cultural workers around the world were just, everything changed. They were maybe on vacation and couldn't get back to their country of service, or they were in the States and couldn't get back, or, were in their country of service and couldn't go back to the States. Everything came to a standstill, and you're just stuck, and you don't know how to navigate that. And so I just feel like this is, very good for people that are going through it at the moment. What can I do? What are the questions I need to be thinking about, or the help that I need to be getting? But also I think it's good for churches. If you have a missions church, that is mission-minded, this is a good thing to help people, help the church be prepared for when you have missionaries that come and stay among you, to help you, minister better to them because they're hurting or they're grieving a loss of a closed door, and it can help them there. And I think it's also very good for families of people that have missionaries in their life, that they can help them as well.
Yeah, so whether you're part of a missions committee, or you're a pastor, or maybe you are one of those missionaries who returned. I have friends who were at a retreat, and their country closed while they were out, and they're coming back to a fairly cold place, but they had packed for the beach, and so literally a door closed, and they were back home not knowing what to do, and are now trying to navigate that. And certainly some are questioning their missionary call, perhaps. And so whether they need to be remobilized, maybe they're hurting. This is a great text called "When Doors Close" by Carol Ghattas. She's our guest today on the Missionary Mobilization podcast. And so, Carol, can you just walk us through some more details about this book? How's it laid out? What types of things do you address in the various chapters?
Sure. It's basically 3 different sections, and the first one is foundations. What is if you're talking about closed doors, you're obviously going to be talking about the first door that's open to service. And so being sure of your call, understanding that scripturally and personally, what is the Lord saying to you? And then also just some pre-flight checklist, some reality checks too, to prepare you for that. And then the second and largest section of the book is potential closed doors, obviously, and they range from all different kinds of doors that can close, doors that close suddenly, to doors that close because of family issues, doors that close because of something you've perhaps done or not done, or a loss of vision, different things like that, burnout. So there's a lot of different chapters in that section. And then obviously the last one is just a conclusion of not falling into it's not fair trap. What do you do? What is a practical step that now a door has closed? What do I do next? And then just bringing it to a conclusion.
That's tough for a lot of missionaries who, at no fault of their own, have had to shift. And if we're just real honest, a lot of missionaries can fall into depression and kind of stall and not know what to do next. I was in a situation when a door closed, and I remember long hours just sitting, kind of shaking my head in the living room saying, this can't be, this isn't right, and very easily could fall into depression. And so this is a great text to not only help those that maybe might be new to missions, to make them aware of some of these issues, but to help keep our missionaries on the field. And, if we are going to talk about and focus on missions mobilization, we do have to address the high attrition rate. We've got to address retention, and your book does that. So I'm really thankful that you've written it. I saw that one of your chapters was about doors that won't even open, and I've never really thought about that in relation to missions. Can you explain that a bit more, and what does that look like?
Well, I think a lot of people perhaps can understand that better after this year of COVID. Sometimes you feel the call to serve, you've answered it, you've maybe started the process even with an organization, and then something happens. Perhaps you've taken your first physical. Many times most missionaries that are going out, the time that they have their very first physical is when they're going overseas for service. And people find out a medical diagnosis that, stops everything. Sometimes a country will not provide you a visa, and you have to figure out, okay, what am I going to do if I can't get into this country? Where do I go next? So there's a lot of things that can just stop, the process, and you need to say, okay, what does this mean? Does that mean, like you said, was I not called, or is the Lord directing me to another area? And I think one good thing to remember in this section or this topic is sometimes the Lord is protecting us when a door closes, and we don't realize it until later. We don't always have the answers why that door has closed, and it just, like you say, you can go into a depression about it, but then you realize later that He's perhaps protected you from a very volatile country, or the idea of being overseas and then finding out about this medical diagnosis, and then you're stuck. So you really realize the Lord is in His hand, is in all of these things.
I remember when the Lord was calling us to be missionaries overseas, and I really struggled for a long time, several months, maybe even over a year, with not knowing God's will and trying to figure out what God wanted me to do. I really wanted to be that, perfectly obedient Christian. And so I was so focused, though, on knowing God's will that I was not focused on knowing God Himself. And it was a mistake that I made, and I see that tendency in myself and others as we navigate these closed doors, and as we do want to be obedient. And in working with young people here at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School in North Dakota, that's many of them are dealing with that very issues. What's God's will for my life? Mm-hmm. And it seems to be that, as we, mentors or pastors or leaders, can help them navigate that process. And certainly there are those doors that close. And I think, in my opinion, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit off script if you're okay with that, but I often will talk to young people and to stress that when you intentionally are getting to know Jesus, that he reveals his will to you. So maybe we need to counsel them not to seek God's will. I don't know. We certainly want them to be obedient, but at the same time, we can get so wrapped up in that we lose sight of just getting to know God himself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think there's this idea of the Bible, to me, is very clear about what his will is, and then he wants all people to come to know him. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. So the question is, what's my part in that? And so, and also, where am I supposed to be doing that? There's, for those that are called to missions, I have found when I look at my life that it's not so much about what I do, but it's about how flexible I am in his hands. And I know what my giftings are, and I think that may be the good place to start. Where are you gifted? What has God given you in your gifts and your talents that he can use for the kingdom, wherever you go? Because, as I said, I've had so many changes in my life. I've gone from, different countries to different languages to different people groups, and yet I see that my gifting, it changes. It comes in different forms. And so, like for now, I'm in this time of writing where I spend a lot of time writing, and I'm using that gifting. My heart is still for missions, but I'm using it in a different way. So I think that once we know where our gifting is, wherever we go, it doesn't matter. And, my husband was always good at that. He didn't care where he was. He just wanted to share the Lord. And so it was very easy for him. He was just like water, just flowing wherever we went. I wasn't quite that flexible, but he was very good at that. But I learned over the years, it's really not what we do. It's how we're available to the Lord. And so perhaps we as Americans especially are job oriented. I am my job. And we need to get away from that a bit, so that we can just say, I'm a believer following Christ. Wherever he takes me, what is he going to open up for me today? And that helps us be more flexible when those doors close.
Mm-hmm. Such good points. And I think especially for missionaries, our identity can be wrapped up in what we do, even confused with salvation, that it can become a works-based thing that we have to be careful of. And so, well, this book may not be an easy read for some readers because, as you write, some doors that close are our own faults. And so talk about why you write about doors that close, because it's your own fault. And how do you navigate that one?
Well, I write about it because I've lived it, for one, that I've been my own worst enemy sometimes in closing doors. And it was, I think I tell in the book the story of when I was single missionary in West Africa, and just the struggles of going through issues that really should have gotten me kicked off the field, but I screamed and begged and cried to stay. But, there's sexual sins, there's relationships that are not healthy, marriage issues come up, and also language learning. In most of our assignments that we have a language requirement. And so if we're not purposeful and we're not spending time learning that language, it's hard. I mean, that's all you do 24/7 for a period of time. Well, actually for the rest of your service, sorry. It's always language learning. But, you can really stop yourself, hinder yourself from being able to serve if you're not putting your efforts into language learning. So these are areas, and also, the saddest one is really a loss of vision. And I have watched that in workers, that they just, you're so confronted with the evil of the world, and the poverty sometimes in some of these countries, and you have a crisis of faith. And if you're not prepared for it, you can have a loss of vision. And I've seen people turn their back on service. I've seen them turn their back on God because they couldn't handle the fact that, they weren't going to be reaching the multitudes. They were going to make a difference perhaps in one life for Christ, but compared to the thousands around them, what did that mean? And so if you're not ready for that, it can really throw you for a loop.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good point. I remember talking with a student several years ago about, they came into my office and they said, Dave, I think that God is calling me to the mission field, and I'm going to do this, 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 and they listed off 4 or 5 things that they were going to do, and I said, well, who are you doing missions for? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, are you doing missions for you, or are you available to the Lord? Are you doing missions for Him? He may guide you in another direction, right? He may close a door and may open up another one. Are you willing to walk through that, or are these just your terms that and this is all? I mean, I've been there myself. When I share this story with my students because it's rather embarrassing, but I once told the Lord that I would be a missionary, but here were my conditions. I would not learn another language. I'm not a linguist. I'm not skilled. I mean, I barely passed a semester of French in high school, and so language comes. So that was condition number 1. I wasn't gonna learn a language, and I listed off a few others. I also listed I'm not going to fundraise. There's no way am I going to go out there and beg for money. So, Lord, aside from these things, I will be your missionary. And of course, it's pretty ridiculous, right? But I am embarrassed, and I was a grown man at this time. So it was. We all tend to have these, conditions, but really every day when it comes down to it, we need to put that blank check back on the table again and say, Lord, have your way, whatever. I will do whatever. I may not be comfortable doing something. I may not want to switch fields. And so your book so beautifully helps us navigate those situations, and those that maybe are pastoring, are mentoring, can read the text as well that you've written and help those that they're ministering to navigate some of these doors. So as we draw near to a close here, what do you hope readers will really gain from your book?
Well, I think the main thing is to gain a realistic perspective of what life in service looks like, because doors do close. I mean, you may stay in the same country for 30 years, but you're going to have doors that close one way or the other, and just to realize that. And also to be able to draw from Scripture. I try to really put a lot of biblical examples and Scripture to help you see these areas, and I hope that will encourage you and to go deep into God's Word for yourself, to find ways to find strength. And also just to grow in your view of your own circumstances, to be able to look at, okay, this is happening right now. What is God trying to say to me through this? What is He teaching me about myself, about Him through this circumstance? And then just be able to navigate it in grace, really.
Such an important topic, and one that really is rarely, if at all, talked about. These different doors, these shifts in missions work that often happen unexpectedly. You plan on going to one city and the doors close, and now you've got to shift. And how do you handle that? So it's called When Doors Close, written by our guest today, Carol Ghattas. And Carol, if our listeners would like to know more about your ministry and your new book, When Doors Close, how can they do that?
they can go to my website, lifeinexile.net, and they'll find my books that are listed there, and When Doors Close there as well. I blog every week on Mondays, our Mission Mondays, so if you'd like to focus on missions, you can always look at my Mission Monday tab and see a blog about missions.
Excellent. Well, we'll be sure to link to your blog in our show notes. If you go to missionarymobilization.org/podcast, you can see all of our episodes there with show notes and links that you can just click on to access those resources. And today, we'd like to thank Assemblies of God World Missions who help sponsor our podcast. You can join AGWM's pipeline to receive personal guided assistance through the process of applying for overseas service and even navigating some of these closed doors. The need is great and the opportunities are endless. Visit Assemblies of God World Missions today at agwm.org. Carol, what an incredible conversation and a great book. Thank you for the hard work that you've put into writing this. It was really great and very insightful to have you on the show today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, until next time, everyone, let's keep praying for more laborers to work in His harvest fields.
You've been listening to the Missionary Mobilization Podcast, a ministry of the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School. You can access free resources online at missionarymobilization.org. Also, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Missionary Mobilization. Thanks for listening.